Mental Health Chats. I'm Claire Davis, and I'm all about bringing you better emotional fitness into your life. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're listening on podcast, please follow. This series is on trauma and PTSD, and we are all about bringing better emotional fitness into the workplace for managers and for your teams. So it's all about spotting those signs, having those conversations, and bringing positive mental health into the workplace. Today, my guest is Carl Jones. Hello, Carl. How are you?
Hi, all good, all good. I'm sat amongst DIY at the moment. I think we've already had this conversation. It's a bit dusty, it's a bit everywhere, but all good. Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Thank you for joining us. And Carl is going to be talking to us about PTSD, the silent killer. So first of all, Carl, whereabouts are you based?
Well, apart from the dusty conservatory that I'm sat in, I'm based in Cheltenham, so it's a lovely part of the country, and I'm very lucky to be here. But yeah, West Country, I guess. So yeah.
Yeah, and for those international viewers and people watching, that's Cheltenham in the UK, because we have people from all over the world. So it's not Cheltenham in Australia, it's Cheltenham in the UK.
It's the original Cheltenham, is the ones the Romans built. There we go.
So, Carl, if you wouldn't mind just telling everybody a little bit about yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Well, first of all, Claire, thanks so much for having me on the show. But what your listeners probably are more interested in hearing is my little bit of my history. And my history is I'm a medically retired police detective. And the reason why I was medically retired was because back in 2011, I attended a normal job that everyone thought was normal back then. And as I was trying to arrest a suspect, and bearing in mind, this is the UK, because obviously you're saying international. So all I had with me was a stupid little can of pepper spray and a stick. That's all I could do. Oh, and my fists, that's about it. So when I went to arrest this person, he decided to pull a gun on me. And when he did, I wasn't ready for it. I didn't know, because in the UK we don't have guns. And it was panic stations. But the next thing that happened, he shot at me 6 times. Wasn't expected, didn't know, and the rest, they say, is history. PTSD kicks in a few years later. It wasn't instant. About 4 years later, when I had to go back to the scene, and after that, it was about just trying to piece my life together. That's the quick 101. I have lots more to tell, but I probably won't bore your listeners too much with that. But
yeah, and what we want to do is actually talk about the PTSD side of things, because there may be some listeners or viewers out there who have either been through something similar themselves, or are in contact through the workplace or through their personal lives with somebody who may have been through something similar to this. So if you can just expand a little bit more, Carl, on what would be the likely outcome whilst you are actually going through this?
What I'd like your listeners to take away from this is, no matter what illness you have, and it can be mental, physical, or anything else, it's not necessarily going to happen to the same person as it happened to me. And that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I'd like to offer anybody. I can talk about my experiences. So for me, PTSD wasn't instant. I had 4 years of some very strange feelings and something that wasn't right in the back of my head. I could feel it, but I didn't know what it was. And I'd already started getting insomnia, wasn't sleeping. People say flashbacks, but mine wasn't flashbacks. Mine was more not coping with situations, and certain feelings was coming up. So it wasn't necessarily images, sights, sounds, smells. It was just feelings that was related to what happened on the night. And then bang, 4 years later, when I got sent back to the scene, it was a few doors down from where it happened. It was then that my life fell apart. From when it fell apart, that's what I can tell you about, because I kind of was able to then to start understanding that it was all to do with that incident. So for 4 years, I was completely in the dark. I just wasn't right. And that was me. But from the moment that the thing really kicked off, I can tell you that I completely lost it. I wasn't able to form sentences. My thought processes were pretty much gone. flashbacks become more realistic, as in it wasn't just feelings, but it was actually scenes of what happened, smells going into the house, even the certain sounds. So I know that what was playing on the TV was video games. Stupid things, but when I hear shoot 'em up video games now, it can set me off. Stupid things like that. On top of that, I developed anxiety. I had depression. I had all the things going with it. And ultimately, while I was trying to deal with these things, me being a cop, I was in uniform, you know, these things shouldn't be affecting me. I had a very important job to do. I was trying to cope instead of really saying I have a mental health condition and I need to deal with this. So, and this is the hard bit to admit to it, is I ended up drinking far too much.
Right.
Not being able to cope, alcohol abuse, things that just didn't start to happen right. I couldn't cope at work anymore. You know, driving into work, I would be wearing clean uniform straight from the wash, from the laundry, sorry. And even before I walked into the door of the nick, it was absolutely soaking wet from sweat. And this wasn't in the summertime. This was sort of during, you know, autumn, winter time. So something wasn't right. Lots of other things obviously came into it. They were the main ones as to what knocked me for six. I had issues with my weight. My weight was yo-yoing from eating too much. I would literally walk into the kitchen, open the cupboard and eat everything in sight, including dry pasta, because I was just like, I just had that empty feeling that I needed to fill. And other times I would starve myself for weeks. And people would say, "You okay?" And because obviously I was falling asleep, I didn't have the energy, didn't have anything, and I was literally just about enough in me just to keep me going, but had no interest in food. So yeah, there's thousands of things.
Carl, out of interest, how long did this go on for until you realized that something wasn't right? Because it sounds like it was quite a long time to me.
It was years. As I say, the incident happened in 2011. When I left the police, when I was medically retired, that was 2019, so 8 years. The first 4 years was almost masked because I couldn't realize why it wasn't right. When it hit and I realized it was to do with that incident, things almost doubled in speed as to the problems started coming out. So basically for 8 years, I really struggled. Whilst trying to be a police officer, I still have the condition now. But now that I've been medically retired, I mean, the end of my career was really quite sad. I mean, I was medically retired. I lost my career. I lost my status. I lost my image of who I was to myself. My wife left me because who would want to be with somebody like me in that state that I was in? I lost my house. I lost my job. I lost everything. I lost my respect for myself. Everything just went. And then once I was out from the police, it was then that I was able to rebuild my life. And what you see now is someone who has a condition, who has had to learn to live with it, had to go through an awful, terrible time to get to the point of where I am now. And you know, when I do these talks and when I come on podcasts and when I go off and speak to people about this, it still affects me. And I'm sure you can probably start to tell that I can feel it in my chest now. It's that anxiety is already building. But it's an important part, I think, of my healing process of me doing this now, and also coming to terms with a lot of things. I mean, I went through a terrible time, and I've got a story and a history to tell. And what I really hope is, from my experiences, people can either draw strength from that or understand, you know, they're not alone. For me, very much, I was alone.
And it's very, very sad that in the workplace, people didn't notice, and that's what we're about. We spend so many hours at work, and you didn't even notice in yourself that something wasn't quite right and what the triggers were. And that's what our aim is, to help people spot the signs in themselves, but also in other people. And you've given us so many examples of things that we can look out for. So thank you for that.
That's fine. And the only thing I'll say is that the organization, the industry that I was working in, into the police force, is very much a caring community for those outside, but for those inside trying to provide that care. And I'm sure this happens along many other large organizations. It's about you being seen as a resource and a tool. And because of that, I don't think I came to terms with it quick enough, because I knew I was a resource and tool rather than an individual that needs to look after themselves. And when I talk about PTSD being a silent killer, and again, I'm sat here thinking, I really don't want to say this, but I think it's key to this conversation we're having, is that when I lost everything and I lost my identity, I mean, I was abusing alcohol, as I say, I had anxiety, I had depression, I had this condition called PTSD that was diagnosed, I was losing my job. The silent killer was I couldn't turn to anyone for help. I didn't feel I could. And the killer part of it was my thoughts of self-harm and suicide. And it's that part of it. Everyone was looking at me thinking I was coping well because I was laughing, I was joking, and it was just a mask that I was trying to wear just to try to keep my job in one piece so that I could have an income and that I could have a life and support myself. But underneath, if you just poked the surface, you would have seen the turmoil, the trouble, the pain that I was in, and I couldn't cope with that anymore. And especially when, as I say, my not only my work life but my personal life exploded as well. So there's your killer. It's the horrible under the skin that no one talks about because no one knows how to.
And that's what we're aiming to do, actually, through all of this, all of my work in my training and having these YouTubes and podcasts, is for people to realize that they are not alone, and the workplace should be a place to support us, not to make us feel like we can't talk about these situations, because it's the first port of call, really, of spotting those signs and getting the help that is needed, because we spend so much time at work.
I agree, and I think in a very busy industry, and I again, I'll use police because that is my experience. When you are constantly, and I mean constantly, in demand, you are no longer seen as a person or an individual, and you're seen as a resource. And if you're not able to conform to that resource need, you're seen as a pain and a trouble, and you basically get overlooked for a number of things. And you don't want that to happen to you, so you have to deny it to yourself so you can deny it to others, for you to be able to get on in an organization that only sees you as a resource. And forgive me for saying this, but policing was and still is a very big, huge part of my life. I never wanted to give it up. It was me, it was my identity. So hindsight's great.
Yeah, and so many corporations and organizations are like this. I worked in an industry where it was very much like this. That's back in the 90s, and this is all about the stigma, and we want to break down that stigma. So Carl, obviously you're being retired medically, and it would be lovely. You've talked a little bit about what you do. If you can expand to everybody what you do, because I think there might be some viewers and listeners out there who may want to get in touch, because you may be able to help their organizations.
I believe I can. So thank you. What I do now, it has been a very long journey for me to be where I was and where I am now. I've alluded that in the past, and what I don't want to do is to lose the opportunity to help others through that. So what I do in that vein is I offer my services as a speaker, as a trainer, and I attend organizations, events, seminars, and I give public speaking performances, let's say, about my personal experiences. And on top of that, because I've gone through this and I want to help people, I've developed what I call as the SLAP technique. And that is the principle behind helping people in any organization to deal with mental health. And that's a SLAP technique for managers, so that they can understand and they can realize and they can come to terms with their staff who may be struggling. And also for individuals, and I'm really sorry if that's really loud because I've got an aeroplane going overhead, SLAP technique for individuals who would like more information and can identify with why they could potentially be feeling as I was right at the beginning of all this process. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Carl. So where can people find you if they're interested in getting in contact?
I am online, so my website is carljones.org, Facebook, Carl Jones Speaker. I'm on Twitter, Carl Jones 1554. I'm on LinkedIn, Carl Jones Speaker as well. And I'm more than happy to chat to anyone. And this isn't going out to any managers out there, but if somebody genuinely wants just to reach out and say, I'm struggling, what can you suggest? I'm open doors. If somebody wants to email, message me, I'm quite happy to chat to anyone who is there, because I've been there, I've done that, I've got the t-shirt, perhaps I can help.
Thank you very much for your honesty and opening up about something that's obviously very, very painful to you. So thank you very much, Carl, because we are helping people come to terms with these situations, especially to spot those signs. So take care and thank you.
You're welcome.